Greetings warriors, splunkers, and adventurers of Hallownest. Today we're taking an in-depth look at some of the important scenes, items, and other teases we found in the new Silksong trailer. No build-up, no long intro necessary, let's get started. Before going over some of what I want to talk about, I want to quickly mention a video Team Cherry uploaded where they gave us lots of insight on how Silksong is going to work, what they're aiming for, and the disparities between playing as Hornet versus playing as the Knight. I'm going to be citing this video quite a bit because a lot of what they say is integral to making sense of some of what we saw in the trailer. And one of the first key takeaways they mentioned both in the video and in the trailer itself is the act of ascending a kingdom rather than descending into the earth. William clarifies that the idea for Hollow Knight started with a game jam where the theme was beneath the surface, and this idea eventually evolved into what Hollow Knight is now. And so with Silksong, this theme is taken and inverted from descension to ascension. Another interesting thing to bring up is the fact that this kingdom is apparently haunted. Now, what exactly this kingdom is haunted by is obscure at best, but Ari does mention a sort of holy citadel located at the very top of this kingdom that you're exploring. And at least to me, I feel like that's tossing a pretty large hint at whatever spirit or force is supposedly on the giving end of this haunting. We know there's some kind of sacred city involved, and that might point to expanding the lore of places like the Resting Grounds. We may see familiar faces of Dream Warriors and other characters in the dream worlds that we might recognize. There's definitely going to be some further explaining on the Deep Nest, and more specifically the Weaver tribe, indicated by this scene right here toward the end of the trailer. And we also got a look at some fresh new areas that I believe were previously cut from the game, and I'll probably do a follow-up video in a couple more days going into further detail about my thoughts on some of that. But I'm sure everyone recognized a particular level that was cut from the first game called the Forest of Bones, and it looks like either that world or a biome heavily inspired by the Bone Forest is probably going to be a region we get to explore in Silksong, so that's pretty exciting. And speaking of surprises, here's something I definitely didn't expect to see in a Hollow Knight game. There's apparently a quest tracker function in Silksong. Towards the second half of the trailer, you're given a look at this menu here, and at first glance, this looks to be some kind of bulletin board that you can interact with, and it gives you lots of side quests and stuff. I'd like to assume most, if not all of the quests given by this board will probably be optional, and these quests will likely be a range of anything from gathering materials to something interesting that I saw called a Grand Hunt, which I'm guessing is probably going to be a sort of rare, really powerful mini-boss type enemy that you can track down and kill for a large bounty. In this particular shot, we see a Grand Hunt mission called the Plumed Rhino, and I don't think we get a glimpse of this enemy anywhere in the trailer, but I'm imagining what it would look like in my head, and don't worry, it looks ridiculously badass. The highlighted quest here has to do with gathering moss berries, and another gathering quest over to the side here is labeled Glimmering Pearls. I'm interested to find out what these items are and what they're supposed to do, because it sounds like this could open up a whole new discussion involving the role of stuff like cooking and alchemy. And the reason I'm thinking of alchemy specifically is because we also got a shot of a moss-covered bug here that looked like he was preparing something in a cauldron, and it looks like Hornet is pretty interested in whatever this bug is doing. So we know there's a crafting system, which we will get into later, so I'm definitely excited to see if there are any goodies and tools we can make from what we get from some of these side quests. In the words of William, it's really the same means of finding things to do in Hollow Knight, only in Silksong it's a little more formalized. Okay, so moving on to the raw gameplay itself, and this is probably going to be the longest section because I just think there's a lot to unpack here. I tried my best to gather everything that I could find from the trailer, but I also don't want to over-analyze anything and end up making this video 10 minutes longer than it should be.
But Rusty, that's the tagline of your channel.
Yeah, I know it is. Shut up. So if the video description wasn't enough of an indication, the way combat is handled in Silksong is not going to be the same it was in Hollow Knight. The combat is very mobile, it's acrobatic, and it seems like the game definitely wants to push the player towards a more frenetic, faster-paced style of gameplay, including but not limited to things like wall hopping, grappling, and what looks to be some sort of backstepping maneuver, which was actually supposed supposed to be in the first Hollow Knight, but it was taken out because of combat pacing issues. It's hard to tell. It might just be her walking backwards, and that's just what the animation looks like. But if that's what they did, then I think the decision to add it to Hornet's repertoire of moves, it makes a lot more sense. The first immediate difference everyone probably picked up on is this fancy little addition here to the player UI. I'm guessing this is some sort of silk meter, because in certain shots you can see this bar both deplete and replenish based on what Hornet is doing and how she's behaving. And if we slow some of the clips down, we get a better look at some of Hornet's capabilities and how this meter is affected. Right now we're looking at a sort of grapple ability that she has that allows her to rapidly close distance between walls and surfaces, and evidently even enemies. We can also see that right after an attack lands, part of that bar is replenished, and this really makes me think that whatever this resource is that she's using, it kind of functions similarly to Soul in Hollow Knight, in that you can perform certain special attacks and behaviors at the expense of this resource, and you can also replenish the same meter by just physically attacking an enemy, or at least that's what it appears to be. And of these certain special attacks, it looks like Hornet also gets a powerful single direction thrusting attack at the expense of some of the silk, and also this AoE attack that I'm sure looks familiar. But if you take a quick glance at the first couple of frames of this shot in particular, you do see what this meter was originally at, and it looks like these attacks expend quite a large chunk of whatever this resource is. And this is super important because not only does this tell us Hornet has access to her own variety of special attacks like the Knight, but a couple abilities seem to have its own unique amount of required energy to use, unlike in Hollow Knight where all of your spells and abilities exhausted the same amount of soul no matter what. This means the player is probably going to have to pay a little more attention to how they use abilities and how they expend this energy, because we've seen so far that this energy or silk or whatever is actually used for not only special attacks and abilities, but it's also used for acrobatic wall climbing movements and all this mobility that seems kind of necessary for Hornet to get around and get to where she's going. This also means Silksong might have a lot of room for really creative speed runs, and though I'm not a speedrunner myself, I'm really interested in seeing how others use all of this mobility the game's giving them to finish the game as quickly as possible. But the one scene that caught my eye, and is it's something I really want to talk about, is how healing works in Silksong as opposed to Hollow Knight. And we have next to nothing on how this mechanic actually works in the grand scheme, but in the trailer we actually were given a single shot of Hornet using an ability that heals herself. And what's especially interesting about this to me is the pace at which everything just sort of happens. By expending all of the silk available, Hornet is able to instantly heal herself up from 2 health points back to a full 5. Again, very unlike Hollow Knight, where healing was a gradual process and you oftentimes had to find a safe place to do so without the risk of getting hit, which interrupted the heal. But in Silksong, the pace is very different, which makes a ton of sense because so far everything we've seen from this game revolves around a very fast-paced playstyle in terms of both combat and in movement. This makes me wonder how the game is going to handle boss fights, because if there's an option to top yourself off with health this instantly, then the strategy of waiting around a corner for an opportunity to heal between attacks is not going to be as prevalent as it was when playing as the Knight. Whereas Hollow Knight has a sort of slower pace with plenty of opportunities to catch your breath and heal up after a skirmish, Silksong looks like it's going in the complete opposite direction, and it looks like even when healing, it really doesn't want you to be standing still for any reason at all. Okay, so towards the second half of the trailer, we also get a few pretty impressive shots that demonstrated Silksong's item and crafting system, and I have to say this is probably the part of the game I'm looking forward to the most. The idea of a character like Hornet throwing an exploding fruit at her enemies is so perfect and is so badass to me. And yes, before I get any comments, I'm sorry, but that thing looks like a tomato. Changing my mind. Anyways, if we go slowly through all of this footage, we get a quick glimpse of some of these items in action. They might only be for a couple couple frames at a time, but if we really slow things down, we can actually get a pretty good idea of what these items are supposed to do. So there's the Pimpillo first and foremost, but there's also a buzzsaw-like contraption that you can set on the ground and launch forward towards an enemy. I feel like this would be really good for maybe some sort of crowd control, and maybe if you just want to push back an entire group of enemies on one side of the screen to give yourself more fighting space. We've also got throwable flies. We don't really see how these function in combat, but it seems like whatever these little guys do, it's a safe bet that it's probably something similar to certain charms in Hollow Knight, like the glowing womb or Weaver Song that summons little helpers for some additional firepower. We also get a quick glimpse of sort of a throwing knife tool in action as Hornet hurls it towards this floating enemy here, and it dies in probably one of the most cinematic ways I've ever seen from this game, which, by the way, another question, is lava in this game going to be an insta-kill? Because that guy's dead. He is dead as shit. And there's also a spiked object here that most players will recognize because this was the same weapon she used against the knight when you fought her in Kingdom's Edge. And now for the head turner. So among other tools, Hornet can also craft healing items of her own that I don't really know what to call it, but it seems like a sort of lifeblood syringe. And in the shot where it's being used, everything sort of happens at once here, so let's slow this clip down a little. Hornet dodges an attack, does a little wall hop, and then in midair injects herself with this syringe-looking item. And it's really difficult to see this if you're watching it at regular speed, but you can barely see in the last couple frames before the scene changes that upon using the item, 2 extra lifeblood masks will spawn ahead of your base health bar. And again, this goes back to what I was saying before with the pace of healing in Silksong versus in Hollow Knight. It happens really quickly and you can heal multiple hit points with the press of a single button. And as surface level as it is, the use of lifeblood here might also give us some lore insight as well. I don't want to jump to that conclusion immediately, but I feel like there's room for speculation there. As we know, the Pale King in the first game wow, I just realized how weird that feels to say. Yeah, there's 2 Hollow Knight games now. Anyways, as most know, the Pale King deemed the use of lifeblood a heresy, and depending on the timeline and whether Silksong takes place before or after the events of the first Hollow Knight, the general stance on the use of lifeblood may or may not be the same. But all we know for sure is this item shows that the implication of lifeblood is still relevant in Silksong, just like it was in Hollow Knight. Silksong is already my 2019 Game of the Year, and I don't even have to play it to know that. Whereas Hollow Knight demands a slower pace from the player, I feel like Silksong is going to flip that on its head completely. Nothing yet on exactly how difficult the game is supposed to be in comparison to Hollow Knight, but we do know it operates at a completely different pace, and who knows, it may end up turning into one of those games where even standing still for any reason is just a hazard in itself. Thanks for tuning in to The Forge. I'm going to be following this game pretty closely for the next few days, so stay tuned for all of that. I'm Rusty, and I will see you next time. Take care.